A once top 10 draft pick is now one of the most forgotten players in football. So let's see what happened to the former first round talent in Josh Rosen.
Off for a first down. Rosen fakes the spike in the end zone. Touchdown!
Out of Torrance, California, Josh was born into a pretty athletic family, considering that his dad was a nationally ranked ice skater and his mom was a captain of the Princeton lacrosse team. Not necessarily the background you'd expect for someone who plays football, and so it only makes sense that he grew up playing tennis, and in fact was ranked in the top 50 in the country as a 12-year-old. But even though he was a really good tennis player, he decided to switch his focus to football going into high school after playing off and on since he was a kid. Well, it turns out the decision was pretty dang smart, as Josh was able to do his thing at the high school powerhouse of St. John Bosco. As a senior, Josh was the LA Times Player of the Year with nearly 3,200 yards and 29 touchdowns. Not too shabby of a performance, but simply the cherry on top to a pretty stellar high school career. Over 11,000 yards and 90 touchdowns at one of the best high schools in the country is not all too bad for a tennis player. It made him one of the top recruits in his class. My man was the #1 ranked pro-style quarterback in the country, and so it wasn't that big of a surprise that he had a bunch of potential landing spots to choose from. Whether it was Michigan, Notre Dame, or USC, there was quite a bit of interest in Josh, but he decided to stay close to home with the good old UCLA Bruins. As one of the top-ranked recruits in his class, and considering the fact that former 3-year starter Tyler Huntley was leaving from the NFL, it gave Rosen a pretty good opportunity to do his thing. So as you could guess, after a little back and forth with the coach, Josh was named the starter going into the season as only a true freshman. To start in your first year with any team is quite a bit of pressure, but considering that UCLA was ranked in the top 15, it was on a whole nother level. Nonetheless, since Josh had started for the last 3 years on arguably one of the best teams in high school football, it seemed like he was ready for the challenge from the very beginning. In the season opener against Virginia, Josh showed up big time with over 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, along with a pretty impressive 80% completion percentage. Not too shabby of a start to the whole college football thing, but his underwhelming play over the next 2 games took him right back to reality, as he passed for twice as many picks as touchdowns, although they were able to win both. Either way, Josh was forced to focus on his game moving forward, and his 5 interceptions the rest of the regular season proved that and much more. But even then, the team was still unable to live up to the whole top 15 hype, as they went 8-4, and although they made the Foster Farms Bowl against Nebraska, the 37-29 loss, along with 2 picks by Rosen, ended the year on a sour note. Nonetheless, Josh was still able to put together a pretty impressive statistical year with nearly 3,700 yards and 23 touchdowns. In fact, the stats were good enough for him to be the Pac-12 Offensive Freshman of the Year, and upon that, a freshman All-American, as he established himself as a rising star on the Golden Coast. With such a season in the rear view, going into his sophomore year, there were quite a bit of lofty expectations on the stud. A 3-pick loss against A&M in the opener had those expectations in question from the get-go, but his performance over the next few weeks put that to rest as he was able to get back on the right track. But sadly, an injury midway through the season threw a monkey wrench in the whole right track thing, as he missed the rest of the year with a shoulder injury. Even then, my man was still able to pass for over 1,900 yards and 10 touchdowns, as he proved that his freshman production was not a fluke. Nonetheless, not only was the injury just a bummer for Josh, but the team as a whole, as they finished the season 1-5, after going an even 3-3 with Josh at the helm, as they missed bowl eligibility. Once again, Josh and the Bruins ended the season on a sour note, but this time it was a complete train wreck. Anyways, considering the rough end to his sophomore season, I'm sure Josh was looking to bounce back big the following year. And so a matchup against A&M in the opener once again was a test to see if my man was back. I mean, I would say nearly 500 yards and 4 touchdowns did that and much more. And by helping the team rally back to win 45-44, they started the year off on a much better note than before. Instead of regressing like he did the previous few years, against Hawaii, he was nearly perfect with 2 more touchdowns than incompletions, as he helped the team to an over 30-point win to start off the year 2-0. But as you could guess, all this was a little too good to be true, as he split touchdowns and picks over the next 4 weeks as the Bruins went 1-3. Even with the 4-game slump, Josh was still able to get back on track to finish off the year with a school record over 3,700 yards and 26 touchdowns. Although a bit of an up and down year for my man, Josh was still second team All Pac-12 and one of the top quarterback prospects in the country. And so it was not much of a surprise that after having arguably his best season to date, Josh decided to declare for the NFL draft as seemingly a first-round talent. I mean, he was talked about as a first-year starter, so if that tells you anything, he was one of the highest-rated quarterbacks in the entire thing. Nonetheless, with quite a bit of hype surrounding the stud, it was not much of a surprise what happened next.
The Arizona Cardinals select Josh Rosen, quarterback, UCLA.
With the 10th overall pick, Josh was drafted by the good old Arizona Cardinals. Surprisingly enough, he was the 4th quarterback taken, and one of 5 that went in the first round. Typically, players are really humble when they get drafted so highly, and talk about wanting to do this and that with the team. But my man Josh went in on the fact that he was taken 10th overall by saying that the players taken ahead of him were quote-unquote 9 mistakes. That is what we like to call big talk, and something you can only back up on the football field. Oh, and by the way, if you were wondering, some of the 9 that were taken above him were guys like Baker Mayfield, Saquon Barkley, Denzel Ward, Bradley Chubb, Quentin Nelson, and Josh Allen. So let's just say he kind of had it coming for him as soon as he stepped foot on the football field. Against Chicago in Week 3, after coming in for Sam Bradford, Josh was given the opportunity to prove himself, considering that the team was only down 2 with 4:30 left. Perfect situation to prove that the 9 guys taken ahead of you were mistakes. But as you could probably guess, Josh ended up throwing a pick and the team lost. A tough pill to swallow for someone who thought that they should have gotten first off the board, but only the beginning of what was a pretty bad season for not just Josh, but the team as a whole. Throughout his 14 games as a starter, Josh passed for nearly 2,300 yards, 11 touchdowns, and a rough 14 picks. Guess that whole mistakes thing really blew up in his face as he led the team to a 3-10 record as a starter, with arguably the worst year of any of his 4 first-round colleagues. Now that such a rough year was in the rearview, it was not much of a surprise that the team decided to part ways with good old Rosen. After drafting Kyler Murray first overall, it wasn't all that crazy when the team traded Josh almost immediately after. In exchange for a 2nd and 5th round pick in the following draft, the Miami Dolphins picked up Josh with the hopes of him bouncing back in South Beach. Although the team gave up a decent bid to pick up the Rosen one, Josh was unable to beat Ryan Fitzpatrick for the starting job as he went into the year as a backup. Nonetheless, after the team started 0-2, Rosen finally got his chance as he was named the starter going into the following week, and so I'm sure he was looking to prove that whole 9 mistakes thing was still true. Well, I mean 200 yards was decent, but considering that he didn't throw a single touchdown and the team lost by 25, I would say he didn't exactly live up to the hype. Even though he wasn't able to do all that much in his first start, he was once again given the opportunity, but this time at home against LA. And although he passed for 180 yards and a touchdown, he also tossed a pick as they once again lost by 20. Even though he was unable to do much of anything on the football field, somehow my man once again got the start against Washington, and this time had arguably the worst game of his entire season with 2 picks and not a single touchdown as it seemed like his time in Miami was coming to an end. Well, fast forward to the following draft, and with the 5th overall pick, the Dolphins took good old Tua T, and as you could guess, Rosen was waived only a few months later after not being able to surpass either Tua or Fitzmagic on the depth chart. Rough enough, unlike when he left Arizona, Miami was unable to find a trade partner, and so he was simply waived. With likely not a bunch of offers, Rosen signed with the Tampa Bay practice squad only 2 years after getting drafted 10th overall. Although there was a hope that he could get his footing with the Bucs, he was only there for a cup of coffee as he was picked up by the 49ers following injury and COVID problems with 3 of their quarterbacks. Even though my man Josh was finally active, he was not able to see any game action as CJ Beathard started both games and led the team to a 1-1 record over that time. But nonetheless, for the first time in his career, Josh was re-signed to a 1-year deal until he was unable to compete for the 3rd quarterback spot and then was once again waived later the same year. Thankfully for my man, it just so happened that Atlanta was in need of a backup following a season-ending injury to AJ McCarron, and so Josh was signed only a week after being dropped by the 49ers. Although he had improved much on the football field, Josh was still named the 2nd string going into the season, behind only Matty Ice and above undrafted rookie Felipe Franks. Well, fast forward to week 2, and since the Falcons were getting routed by Brady and the Bucs, Josh was able to come in during the last drive with 2 incompletions as my man was unable to do a single thing. Then fast forward again to week 10, and this time Josh was able to come in for Matt in the 3rd quarter, now with a shot to prove that he had the talent to compete. But as you could guess, he couldn't do much of anything, as he only completed 1 pass the entire time, and led the team to a 40-point loss against the Cowboys. But even with the struggles, Josh was still given another shot the following week against New England, and as you could guess, once again he floundered, as he had as many completions as interceptions, with his pick being returned for his sole touchdown as a Falcon. Turns out that would be his last action that year, and so now the former top 10 pick is a free agent once again. Considering how rough these last few performances were for Miami and Atlanta, I don't know if Josh will see any on-field action in the NFL again. What I likely think is going to happen is A, he leaves for the CFL or XFL or something like that, or B, bounces around practice squads until he eventually calls it quits. It's a sad reality for a former All-American talent, but it really just seems like he had it coming ever since the very beginning. Josh Rosen may have been able to talk the talk, but he sure as heck couldn't walk the walk, and hopefully that's a lesson to any young player. If you're going to talk big game, you better back it up.
There were 9 mistakes made ahead of me, and I will make sure over the next decade or so that they will know that they made a mistake.
Seattle coming up, and this is a pick. Has some time, throws, and that's intercepted.
Thanks for watching the video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment down below stuff you want next. But anyway, see you all soon, and peace out.